It is funny how memory works. You think the worst day of your life is the day the bomb goes off, the day the glass shatters. But it isn't. The worst day is usually years earlier. A quiet evening, a passing glance, a subtle shift in the air that you were too comfortable, too blind to feel. For me, the explosion happened the day the surrogate handed over the baby. But the timer started on a humid evening in late August, long before the lies, long before the sterile clinics and the whispered arguments in the dark. It started with a dress, a simple, unassuming piece of fabric, and my best friend's eyes. Let me back up. Mark and I were the kind of friends that people made jokes about. Blood brothers. We shared absolutely everything, from scraped knees on the playground to warm beer in college dorms, to the terrifying reality of entering our 30s. He was the loud one, the charismatic magnetic pull in every room he walked into. I was the quiet one, the anchor, the safe place to land. We balanced each other out, a perfect unspoken equilibrium. And then came Sarah. When I met Sarah, I fully expected the dynamic to shift. The serious girlfriend enters, the best friend gets pushed to the periphery. It is the natural order of things. But Sarah wasn't like that. She was effortless, soft-spoken but with a brilliant biting wit that caught you totally off guard. She had this quiet beauty, the kind that didn't demand attention, but somehow kept it anyway. She didn't just fit into my life. She fit seamlessly into our life. Mark adored her, not romantically. At least, that is the lie I fed myself for half a decade. He loved her like a sister. He protected her. He made her laugh on the days when my practical, serious nature became too heavy. We were a trio, an unbreakable triad. People used to look at us with genuine envy. The perfect couple and the fiercely loyal best friend who would take a bullet for either of them. We were safe. I was so incredibly safe. Or so I thought. You see, trust is a blinding, dangerous thing. It acts like a harsh spotlight. It illuminates the goodness right in front of you, but it plunges the corners of the room into absolute darkness. You don't see the shadows creeping in. You don't see the subtle changes in posture, the lingering touches disguised as casual platonic affection. I trusted Mark with my life. I trusted Sarah with my very soul. Putting them in the same room felt like putting my two favorite halves of myself together. I never once thought to guard my own heart against the people who helped me build it. Looking back, I want to scream at the younger version of me. I want to shake him until his teeth rattle. I want to tell him to open his eyes. Because the rot was already there. Long before the surrogate entered our home. Long before the agonizing nights crying over negative pregnancy tests. The betrayal was already planted, taking root in the dark, waiting to bloom. And the very first seed was sown at our rehearsal dinner. The rehearsal dinner was a blur of warm light and nervous energy. We rented out the back patio of a local Italian place. Strands of yellow bulbs draped overhead. The heavy, humid August air clung to everything. I was standing near the makeshift bar. Mark was leaning against the brick wall next to me. He was halfway through a story, gesturing wildly with a glass of scotch in his hand. I was laughing. Everything was perfect. And then Sarah walked in. She had been running late. A wardrobe malfunction with her original outfit she had texted. So she threw on a backup. It was a dress I'd never seen before. It was a slip dress, champagne-colored silk. It was shockingly simple. Just two whisper-thin straps holding up a drape of fabric that flowed over her body like liquid glass. No intricate beading, no flashy jewelry, just bare shoulders, a delicate collarbone, and the soft, clinging drape of that champagne silk. She looked ethereal, untouchable, but dangerously real. I started to step forward. I started to raise my hand to wave her over. But I stopped. Because out of the corner of my eye, I saw Mark. His story died in his throat. His hand, the one holding the scotch, slowly lowered to his side. He went completely rigid. The air around us seemed to instantly drop 10 degrees. I turned my head slightly, watching his profile. He was staring at my fiancée. But this was not the fond, warm look of a best friend. This was not the safe, brotherly affection I was so used to seeing. This was dark. This was consuming. His eyes were locked onto her with a terrifying intensity. He looked like a man who was dying of thirst, staring at a glass of water he wasn't allowed to drink. His gaze dragged over her, slow, deliberate, taking in the dip of the neckline, the curve of her waist where the silk clung the tightest. It was an invasive, intimate look, the kind of look a man only gives a woman behind locked doors. The silence stretched. It stretched until it felt like a rubber band about to snap against my skin. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. The patio was filled with the noise of 50 people talking and laughing, clinking glasses, scraping chairs. But right there in our little 3-foot radius, there was only a suffocating vacuum. Then the most devastating thing happened. Sarah stopped walking. She had been scanning the crowd looking for me. But her eyes didn't find me. They found Mark. Across the patio, through the sea of our families and friends, their eyes locked. Sarah's breath caught. I saw the subtle rise and fall of her chest freeze. The shy, apologetic smile she had walked in with vanished. For 2 long, agonizing heartbeats, they just stared at each other. A silent conversation passing between them. A heavy electric current. It felt like I was trespassing in my own life. Like I was standing outside a window, watching a private moment I had no business seeing. And then the spell broke. Mark blinked hard. He cleared his throat, a rough scraping sound. He downed the rest of his scotch in one violent swallow. He slammed his hand onto my shoulder. His grip was too tight, almost painful. God, man, he laughed. A loud, grating, unnatural laugh. You are punching so far above your weight class. He didn't look at me when he said it. He was still staring at the ground. Sarah hurried over. She kissed my cheek. She hugged Mark. She complained about the traffic. Everything snapped back into place. The play resumed. The actors hit their marks. But my stomach was in free fall. A cold, primal instinct flared in my brain. A bright red warning light flashing. Threat, betrayal, danger. I felt nauseous. The humid air suddenly felt suffocating. But what did I do? I smiled. I took my fiancée by the waist, and I pulled her close. I looked at my best friend, and I forced a laugh. I actively, consciously chose to gaslight myself. You are crazy, I thought. It is just the wedding jitters. He is happy for you. She is beautiful. Anyone would look. You are being paranoid. I repeated those lies to myself all night. I repeated them the next morning. I repeated them as I put on my tuxedo. I took a shovel, and I buried my intuition under 6 feet of blind loyalty. I handed them the matches, and I watched them burn my life to the ground. The morning of the wedding was a masterpiece of denial. I stood in front of the floor-length mirror in my hotel suite. Tying my black bow tie, my fingers were clumsy, my hands were shaking. Not from the typical groom jitters, not from the overwhelming weight of forever. I was shaking from a quiet, pulsing dread that I absolutely refused to name. The image from the night before? Mark staring at Sarah in that champagne silk dress? He kept flashing behind my eyelids every time I blinked. A persistent, toxic slideshow. I looked at my reflection, and I made a choice. A terrible, life-altering choice. I chose to be blind. I washed my face with ice-cold water. I slapped my own cheeks. I told myself I was a lucky man, a blessed man, and that my insecurities were going to ruin the best day of my life if I didn't lock them away. So I built a vault in my mind. I shoved the doubts inside, and I swallowed the key. The ceremony was a blur of white tulle and violin music. When Sarah walked down the aisle, she took my breath away. But as she approached the altar, I felt it. Mark was standing directly to my right. My best man, my brother. As Sarah drew closer, I could hear Mark's breathing change. It became shallow, erratic. I could feel the heat radiating off him, the rigid electric tension in his frame. When she finally stood in front of me, I didn't look at Mark. I couldn't. I focused entirely on her. I said my vows. I slipped the ring onto her trembling finger. I kissed my wife. The crowd erupted. The applause washed over us. But the real test, the moment the vault in my mind almost cracked open, was the reception. The clinking of champagne glasses against silver forks, the gentle hum of 100 conversations. The lights dimmed. A single spotlight hit the center of the dance floor. Mark stepped into the light. He held the microphone. He looked incredibly handsome, confident. The charming, charismatic best friend, ready to deliver the perfect toast. He started with the standard jokes, the embarrassing college stories. The crowd roared with laughter. He had them in the palm of his hand. But then, the tone shifted. The jokes faded. The bright, booming quality of his voice softened. It dropped an octave. It became quiet, intimate, too intimate. He turned his body slightly away from the crowd. He turned away from me. He locked eyes with Sarah. When I first met Sarah, he said, his voice echoing through the silent ballroom, I knew my best friend was a dead man. I knew he was a goner. Because a woman like Sarah, she doesn't just enter a room. She alters the gravity. A few people chuckled, a polite, gentle sound. But Mark wasn't smiling. She is the kind of woman who makes you rethink everything, he continued. The microphone amplified the heavy, deliberate pause. Your plans, your life, your loyalties. The silence in the room suddenly felt very heavy. The polite smiles on the faces of my family members started to strain. She is beautiful, yes, Mark said, taking a slow step toward our sweetheart table. But it is her heart. It is the way she looks at you when you are broken. It is the way she understands the darkest parts of a man and chooses to stay anyway. She ruins you for anyone else. He paused. The silence was deafening. He was staring right into her eyes, and she was staring back. Her hands were folded in her lap, her knuckles white. Her chest was rising and falling rapidly. It wasn't a speech to a bride and groom. It was a confession. A raw, bleeding confession delivered in front of 150 witnesses, disguised as a compliment. For a terrifying second, I thought he was going to drop the microphone and walk out. Or worse, walk over and pull her out of her chair. But the tension snapped. Mark blinked. The charming, easygoing mask slammed back onto his face. He turned to me, raising his glass high. To the luckiest man I have ever known, take care of her brother, because if you don't, I will. The crowd laughed. The tension broke into thunderous applause. The music swelled. It was a joke, just a classic protective best friend joke. I stood up. I clinked my glass against his. I pulled him into a hard, masculine hug. But as I patted his back, my eyes met Sarah's over his shoulder. She looked terrified. For the rest of the night, I watched them. I couldn't help it. I watched the way they avoided each other, the unnatural, forced distance they kept. But I also saw the stolen glances. When Mark was at the bar, I saw Sarah's eyes dart toward him. When Sarah was dancing with her father, I saw Mark watching her from the shadows. His jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might shatter. It was a magnetic, agonizing pull. Two opposing poles violently resisting each other. I drank 4 glasses of whiskey. I pulled my new wife onto the dance floor. I buried my face in her neck and breathed in her perfume. I told myself I had won. I told myself the ring on her finger was the only reality that mattered. I spent the next 5 years paying for that delusion. 5 years vanished, just like that. Marriage is supposed to be a progression, a building of a shared life. But ours became a waiting room, a sterile, heartbreaking loop. We wanted a family. We wanted it more than anything in the world. But biology is a cruel, indifferent master. Let me tell you about infertility. It is not just a medical diagnosis. It is a slow, methodical invasion of your privacy, your marriage, your dignity. Month after month, year after year, the hope would rise sharp and blinding. And then the crash, the bruises on her stomach from the daily injections, the alarm going off at 4 in the morning, the singular red line on a plastic stick, the sound of Sarah crying on the cold bathroom tiles. It breaks you. It fractures your foundation. Our house grew quiet. The laughter that used to echo off the walls died. The empty guest bedroom at the end of the hall sat with the door firmly shut, a wooden monument to our failure. Our intimacy became clinical, a mechanical chore dictated by thermometers and ovulation calendars. I was exhausted. I was working 60-hour weeks to pay for the endless cycles of IVF, the loans, the specialist visits. I desperately wanted to be her rock. But I was crumbling. I was so incredibly hollow. And when a husband crumbles, when the space beside a grieving wife gets cold, someone else steps into the warmth. Mark. He was always there. When I was stuck at the office agonizing over spreadsheets to pay the next medical bill, Mark was on my couch. He brought takeout. He brought a bottle of wine she wasn't allowed to drink just to make her laugh. I would come home dead on my feet and hear them in the kitchen. Low voices, the soft murmur of shared secrets, the clinking of dishes. I would stand in the darkened hallway, listening to my wife laugh with my best friend. A rich, genuine laugh I hadn't heard in months. I should have been jealous. I should have been territorial, but I was just relieved. I was so bone-tired. I outsourced my wife's emotional survival to the man I trusted most. It is the greatest regret of my life. I handed him the keys to my home, and I went to sleep. Mark became the third pillar in our marriage. He knew her cycle. He knew the dates of her blood tests. He knew the exact medical terminology the doctors used. Sometimes he knew things before I did. Sarah told me her hormone levels dropped, he said to me once, casually over a beer. I had just gotten home. I hadn't even taken my shoes off. She hadn't told me yet. I brushed it off. I was rationalizing my own displacement. Then came the final appointment. The doctor sat across from us. His face was a mask of professional pity. Sarah's body simply could not carry a child to term. The damage was done. The door slammed shut. The car ride home was a suffocating tomb. For 3 weeks, Sarah didn't get out of bed. She became a ghost, pale, silent, staring blankly at the ceiling. I didn't know how to pull her back, but Mark did. He came over on a rainy Tuesday evening. He didn't bring takeout this time. He brought a thick, glossy folder. He sat down at our dining table. He looked at Sarah. Then he looked at me. "There's another way," he said. His voice was firm, hypnotic, commanding. Surrogacy. I blinked. I told him it was impossible. It was too expensive. We had drained our savings. The vetting process took years. Mark shook his head. He leaned forward, his eyes locked onto Sarah's. "I already looked into it," he said. "I found an agency, a private one, fast-tracked." He opened the folder. He slid a profile across the polished wood. "Her name is Chloe," Mark said softly. "She is perfect, young, healthy, and I can help with the money. Think of it as an investment in my future niece or nephew." Sarah looked at the photo. A vibrant, smiling young woman. For the first time in almost a month, a spark lit up in Sarah's dead eyes. Her hand trembled as she touched the glossy paper. She looked up at Mark. It was the look of a drowning woman staring at a life raft. A look of pure, unadulterated devotion. I felt a cold prickle at the base of my neck. Why had he done this? How did he have this ready? But before the thought could fully form, Sarah turned to me. Tears were streaming down her face. With a single, desperate, shattered look, she begged me to say yes. So I swallowed my pride. I swallowed the creeping unease of my best friend handing me a prepackaged family. I looked at Mark. I thanked him. I called him a brother, a lifesaver. I didn't know I was thanking the architect of my own destruction. I didn't know I had just signed the contract for my own execution. The process moved with terrifying speed. Usually surrogacy takes years. The legalities, the psychological evaluations, the agonizing matching process. But Mark's money, Mark's money acted like a golden key. It unlocked every door. It bypassed every waiting list. Within 3 months, the embryo transfer was complete. 2 weeks later, the clinic called. I was sitting at my desk when Sarah texted me a picture of the results. Positive. We were going to be parents. I rushed home. I bought 24 roses. I burst through the front door, tears already blurring my vision. I found Sarah in the kitchen. I dropped the flowers. I wrapped my arms around her and buried my face in her neck. I was sobbing. The years of failure, the agonizing grief, it was finally over. But she didn't cry. She stood perfectly still. Her arms wrapped around my waist, but her posture was rigid. She patted my back 1, 2, 3 times. It wasn't the embrace of a wife who had just been handed a miracle. It felt like a formality, a polite obligation. I pulled back, wiping my eyes. I asked her if she was okay. She smiled, a thin, tight smile. She said she was just in shock. I believed her, because I desperately wanted to. But that was the day the temperature in our house officially dropped. As Chloe's pregnancy progressed, the distance between Sarah and me expanded into an unbridgeable canyon. She wasn't glowing. She wasn't excitedly buying baby clothes or looking at paint swatches with me. She was wired, distracted, constantly on edge. And her phone became a physical extension of her hand. I would walk into a room and she would abruptly turn the screen off, face down on the counter. I would wake up at 2 a.m. to find her side of the bed empty. I would wander down the dark hallway and hear her hushed, frantic whispering from the downstairs bathroom. When I asked her who she was talking to, the answer was always the same. Just Mark. He was helping her manage the anxiety, she said. He was acting as the liaison with the agency. He was just checking in. But he wasn't just checking in. He was omnipresent. Mark became a permanent fixture in our home. He knew the dates of Chloe's doctor appointments before I did. He knew her blood pressure readings. He knew her exact dietary cravings. One Saturday afternoon, I came home early from the office. I walked up the stairs. The door to the guest bedroom, the future nursery, was wide open. I stopped in the doorway. Mark was on his knees. He was assembling a ridiculously expensive crib, the kind carved from solid mahogany. Sarah was sitting on the floor across from him, her knees pulled to her chest. They weren't speaking. The room was utterly silent. But the air was thick, heavy, suffocating. They were just looking at each other. And there it was again. That exact same look from the rehearsal dinner. The champagne silk dress look. Raw, intimate, consuming. It was the look of 2 people who shared a secret universe. A universe I was not allowed to enter. I cleared my throat. They both snapped their heads toward me, guilty, startled. Mark jumped to his feet, a plastic wrench dropping from his hand. He laughed. That same grating, unnatural laugh. Just helping out, man, he said, wiping his hands on his jeans. You work too hard. Someone has got to build the throne for the new king. I stared at him. Then I stared at my wife. My blood turned to ice water. That night, the dam broke. I finally confronted her. We were in the kitchen. The house was quiet. I asked her why Mark was paying for the premium prenatal vitamins. Why he was the one who drove her to see the surrogate when I had a mandatory board meeting. Why he was choosing the stroller. I asked her why she looked at him like he was the father of her child. The reaction was instant. And it was vicious. Sarah didn't cry. She didn't crumble. She went on the offensive. Are you insane? She hissed, her eyes narrowing. He is our best friend. He is the only reason we are getting this baby. He put down $70,000 of his own money to make this happen. And you are jealous. She stepped closer to me, her voice dripping with venom. You are never here. You are always at work. You left me to drown in my own grief for 5 years, and Mark pulled me out. How dare you accuse me? How dare you? She weaponized my guilt. She took my deepest insecurity, that I hadn't been enough for her during the infertility, and she twisted the knife. I broke. I crumbled. I apologized. I begged for her forgiveness. I told her I was just stressed. I was just tired. I willingly drank the poison she poured for me. I let her gaslight me into absolute submission. I spent the next 4 months living as a ghost in my own marriage, a spectator to their shared miracle. I watched Mark touch her shoulder. I watched them share inside jokes. I watched them prepare for a baby that I was paying for with my soul. I thought I was just losing my mind. I had no idea I was about to lose my entire reality. There is a specific kind of silence that happens right before your life ends. It is not peaceful. It is a heavy, pressurized vacuum. It feels like being underwater. It was a Tuesday morning. 7 months into the pregnancy, Sarah was at a yoga class. Mark was supposedly at his office. The house was empty. Just me, the rhythmic sound of rain against the windows, and the suffocating smell of fresh paint. I was standing in the nursery. I was just looking at the room, trying to force myself to feel a connection to it, trying to summon the joy of a father. My eyes drifted to the mahogany dresser. Mark had been over the night before helping Sarah organize baby clothes. He had left his iPad sitting on the edge of the wood, a sleek silver rectangle. I didn't intend to snoop. I swear to God I didn't. I was just going to move it so it wouldn't get scratched. But as my hand brushed the screen, it lit up. A notification banner was sitting dead center on the lock screen. It was an email from the private surrogacy clinic. The subject line read, "Urgent final legal disclosures. Signature required." I froze. Why was the clinic emailing Mark for a legal signature? He was just the financial sponsor. I was the father. I was the one on the contract. A cold, dead weight dropped into my stomach. The instinct, that primal, flashing red warning light from 5 years ago. It screamed in my head. I picked up the iPad. I stared at the passcode screen. 4 empty dots. Without even thinking, I typed in Sarah's birthday. The screen unlocked instantly. The email was open. I stared at the bright white background, the black text, the clinical professional font of the doctor we had trusted. Please review the attached genetic and legal affidavits to ensure the birth certificate reflects the correct biological parentage. My hand started to shake. A fine, uncontrollable tremor. I tapped the PDF attachment. It took 2 seconds to load. 2 seconds that separated my old life from my new reality. The document appeared. A standard medical form, gestational carrier Chloe. I scrolled down. My breathing stopped. The room started to spin. Egg donor, biological mother, Sarah. I blinked. I read it again. Sarah. They had used the viable embryos from our last failed IVF cycle. The ones she told me the clinic had discarded because they were too fragile. I scrolled down one more line. My finger was numb. Sperm donor / biological father Mark. I dropped the iPad. It hit the plush nursery rug with a soft, sickening thud. I couldn't breathe. The air in the room was completely gone. I fell to my knees. My chest was caving in. I pressed my hands against the floorboards. I squeezed my eyes shut, but the words were burned into the back of my eyelids. Biological father Mark. Wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a typo. It was a blueprint. Everything snapped backward. A violent, high-speed rewind through the last 5 years of my life. The jigsaw puzzle pieces flew through the air, violently slamming together to form a monstrous, horrifying picture. The hushed phone calls at 2 a.m. She wasn't managing her anxiety. She was talking to the father of her child. The $70,000. It wasn't a selfless gift from a devoted best friend. It was the exact cost of creating a human life. It was his child support. He didn't find the surrogate to save my marriage. He found the surrogate so he could finally breed with my wife. They couldn't be together. It would ruin their reputations. It would destroy our friend group. It would make them the villains. So they used me. They used my house, my insurance, my blind, pathetic, unbreakable trust. They turned me into a glorified roommate, a financial shield to hide their biological miracle. And then, The final piece fell into place. The rehearsal dinner, the champagne silk dress, the suffocating silence on the patio, the way he looked at her, the dark, consuming, possessive gaze. He wasn't looking at my bride. He was looking at his soulmate. And his speech. God, his speech at the wedding. A woman like Sarah alters the gravity. She makes you rethink your loyalties. He told me. He stood in front of my entire family holding a microphone, and he confessed his crime before he even committed it. I sat on the floor of the nursery surrounded by expensive toys and organic cotton blankets, and I started to laugh. A dry, cracked, hysterical sound that scraped my throat raw. I was a dead man. I had been a dead man for 5 years. I just hadn't noticed the rot setting in. I didn't scream. I didn't smash the mahogany crib to splinters. When your heart actually breaks, it doesn't make a sound. It just stops working. I picked up the iPad. I carried it downstairs. I placed it precisely in the center of the kitchen island, the screen still illuminated with their genetic confession. Then I sat in the dark, and I waited. An hour later, the front door opened. They walked in together, Sarah and Mark, laughing about the rain, shaking out their umbrellas. They didn't see me in the shadows. They were too busy existing in their own private universe. Mark reached out and tucked a wet strand of hair behind my wife's ear. A casual, impossibly intimate gesture. I flipped the kitchen light switch. The fluorescent hum cracked the air like a whip. They froze. Sarah's hand dropped from Mark's arm. Mark's charming smile instantly vanished. I didn't stand up. I just looked at the iPad. Then I looked at them. "The clinic needs a signature," I said. My voice was dead, flat, unrecognizable. "To establish the correct biological parentage." The silence that followed wasn't just heavy. It was lethal. I watched the blood drain from Sarah's face. She looked at the iPad. She looked at Mark. Her mouth opened, but only a dry, rattling gasp came out. Mark stepped forward. The eternal protector. "Listen to me," he started, his voice trembling for the very first time. He raised his hands in a pathetic surrender. "It isn't what it looks like. We were trying to protect you. You were so broken. The doctor said her eggs were too fragile, but we wanted to try one last time. We didn't want to break your heart again if it failed." The twisted, sickening logic of it all. "Protect me," I whispered. I stood up. The physical distance between us felt like 1,000 miles. "You didn't protect me. You replaced me," I said, my voice finally rising, echoing off the high ceilings. I looked directly into my best friend's eyes. "You used my grief. You used my home. You used my name to build your family. You financed your own child, and let me thank you for it." Sarah started to cry, the ugly, jagged sobs of a cornered animal. She reached out for me. I stepped back. The flinch was involuntary. "Don't," I said. I walked past them. I grabbed my car keys from the hook by the door. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't ask for explanations. There was nothing left to say. They'd already written the entire script without me. I stopped with my hand on the doorknob. "You can keep the house, Mark," I said without looking back. "You already moved in 5 years ago." I walked out into the rain. I closed the door on my marriage. I closed the door on my best friend. I drove away, leaving them alone in the life they stole from me. Betrayal rarely comes from your enemies. It comes from the people who have the keys to your home. It comes disguised as comfort, as loyalty, as a champagne silk dress. It teaches you a terrifying lesson. The more you trust someone, the larger the blind spot you create for them to hide in. What would you do if the two people you loved most in the world systematically erased you from your own life? Would you demand revenge, or would you simply walk away and let them live with the ghosts they created? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, consider subscribing to the Betrayal Files. We have many more stories in the dark. Until next time, keep your eyes open.